Hello everyone, and welcome. Let's get right into it. Our main character today is Amelia, a talented pastry chef building her own small business. This is the story of the night her world shattered, beginning with a single, brazen text message from her husband's phone, sent by his boss, Sarah. It's a story of betrayal, but also of discovering the strength she never knew she had. If you're ready for her story, please consider subscribing and supporting this channel. The flour felt cool against Amelia's hands, a familiar comfort in the sterile quiet of her small commercial kitchen. It was 2 a.m., an hour when the rest of the city slept, but for her, it was peak creation time. Her small pastry business, the Artful Crust, was finally gaining traction, built on sleepless nights exactly like this. She kneaded the dough with a practiced, rhythmic motion, her mind sorting through orders. 3 dozen croissants for the downtown cafe, 2 specialty cakes for a weekend wedding, and a large batch of her signature lemon tarts. This business was her dream, built from scratch with savings she and her husband, Mark, had meticulously set aside. Or rather, she had meticulously set aside. Mark was supportive, mostly, but his focus had recently shifted entirely to his demanding new job at a high-profile consulting firm. A phone buzzed on the steel countertop, vibrating sharply against a metal bowl. It wasn't hers. It was Mark's. He'd left it behind again, a habit that had become increasingly frequent. She sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. He was supposedly at a mandatory late-night project deadline with his team, led by his formidable boss, Sarah Mitchell. Amelia disliked Sarah, disliked the way Mark's voice changed when he spoke about her, a mix of admiration and a nervous energy she couldn't quite place. She picked up the phone, intending to silence it, when the screen lit up with a text notification. But it wasn't a new text coming in. It was an outgoing text, sent from his phone to her phone. Her heart gave a strange, painful lurch. Why would he text her from his own phone when he wasn't even here? Confusion turned to ice as she read the words displayed on her own screen, sent just moments ago from the device in her hand. It was from Sarah, except it wasn't to Sarah. It was from Sarah, using Mark's phone. The message was blunt, cruel, and unmistakably triumphant. "He's mine now. He's occupied. Don't wait up." Amelia read it once. Twice. The words blurred, the hum of the refrigerators suddenly deafening. "He's mine now." It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was a declaration of war, sent from her husband's phone at 2 a.m. The air left her lungs. The familiar, comforting scent of yeast and sugar suddenly turned sour, choking her. This wasn't just an affair, it was an invasion. This text was a power play, a deliberate act of humiliation. Sarah wasn't just taking her husband, she was marking her territory, ensuring Amelia knew exactly who had won. Her hands began to shake, not with fear, but with a sudden, cold rage that clarified everything. Every late night, every distracted conversation, every time he'd brushed off her concerns about Sarah as just professional admiration, it all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of deceit. She thought of the sacrifices she'd made, the hours she poured into her business, the shared future they were supposedly building. It was all a lie. He was with her. Right now. She looked at the phone in her hand, this cold, black rectangle that had just detonated her life. Her first instinct was to throw it, to shatter it against the pristine white tiles. Her second was to cry, to collapse onto the floor and let the grief consume her. But the rage held her upright. It was a steel rod down her spine. Sarah wanted a reaction. She wanted tears. She wanted a fight. Amelia would give her neither. Her fingers moved with surprising steadiness over her own phone's keyboard. She typed a reply to the number, to Sarah, who was no doubt watching Mark's phone, waiting for the explosion. Her message was short, devoid of the emotion churning inside her. "Keep him. We're done." She hit send. The finality of it echoed in the quiet kitchen. It wasn't a plea or a question. It was a judgment. She turned back to the dough, but her hands were still. The text wasn't the end, it was the beginning. She had just drawn a line, and she knew, with a dreadful certainty, that this night was far from over. The silence stretched, heavy and agonizing. She counted the seconds, each one a hammer blow against her ribs. She was closing a door, and she had no idea what, or who, was about to come knocking on the other side. The delivered notification beneath her text felt as final as a gavel strike. Amelia stood frozen, her own phone clutched in her right hand, Mark's in her left. The two devices felt impossibly heavy, anchors pulling her down. There was no immediate release, no flood of tears. Instead, a hollow, ringing silence filled her head, drowning out the familiar hum of the coolers. The rage that had steadied her hand now receded, leaving behind a chilling, stark clarity. It was over. A marriage, a partnership, a future she had meticulously planned, all erased by a single, arrogant text message. She had just told her husband of 6 years to get out of her life, and she had meant it. The dough she had been kneading lay abandoned on the flowered steel table, a pale, lifeless lump. It was a metaphor, she thought bitterly, for the life she had been trying to build. She stared at it, the physical proof of her interrupted dream. 20 minutes, the original story had said. 20 minutes until they arrived. A strange, frantic energy began to thrum beneath her skin. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't bake. She couldn't pretend that the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. She walked out of the small kitchen, untying her apron and throwing it onto a stool. The fabric, dusted with flour, landed with a soft whoosh, the sound echoing in the 2 a.m. stillness. She paced the small living room of their apartment, which was connected to her workspace. Each step was a beat in a frantic drum solo of thoughts. He's mine now. The words looped, over and over. How long? How long had this been happening right under her nose? The late nights, the client dinners, the scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume on his suit jackets that he dismissed as just someone from the office. Sarah! It had always been Sarah. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. She had hosted that woman in this very apartment for a Christmas party. She had smiled, shaken her hand, and complimented her dress, all while this betrayal was taking root. She stopped at the window, looking down at the empty, rain-slick street. She saw their shared car, the sensible sedan she had picked out. She saw the potted plants on the balcony, the ones she watered. The entire apartment was a museum of their life, and she suddenly wanted to burn it all to the ground. Mark wasn't just a man, he was her partner. They had built this, but the text proved he had been dismantling it in secret for God knows how long. The "don't wait up" was the cruelest part. It implied this was routine, that Amelia was nothing more than a housekeeper waiting to lock up. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the apartment wall. A sleek, black luxury sedan, Sarah's car, the one Mark had boasted about, pulled up aggressively to the curb. The engine cut off, plunging the street back into silence. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird. They were here. She hadn't truly believed it. She thought her text would end it for the night, that the confrontation would wait for the sober light of day. But Sarah wasn't a sober light of day person. She was a 2 a.m. scorched earth predator. The car doors opened. She heard 2 distinct sets of footsteps on the pavement below, then echoing in the building's stairwell. One, a sharp, impossibly confident click-clack of high heels. The other, a heavier, shuffling tread. Reluctant, ashamed. The doorbell rang. A shrill, demanding buzz that sliced through the quiet. Amelia walked to the door. She didn't look through the peephole. She knew who was there. Her hand was perfectly steady as she unlocked the deadbolt. She pulled the door open, bracing herself. And there they were, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Sarah was in front, exactly as Amelia had pictured. She wore a sleek black dress, her makeup perfect, her blonde hair artfully tousled. A proud, triumphant smirk played on her lips. Behind her, partially eclipsed, was Mark. He looked horrendous. His tie was loose, his shirt untucked, and his face was a ghastly, pale white. He couldn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere on the floor by her feet. The silence stretched, thick and toxic. Sarah's smirk widened, seeming to drink in the sight of Amelia in her old sweats and a tank top, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. This was the moment Sarah had engineered, the powerful boss, the defeated wife. Well, Sarah's voice, smooth and laced with condescension, broke the quiet. That was a fast reply. I assumed you'd be more upset. Crying maybe. Amelia looked past her, her eyes landing squarely on her husband for the first time. He flinched, but still wouldn't look up. Her voice, when it came, was not the shriek of a hysterical woman. It was as cold and hard as the steel countertops in her kitchen. "What do you want?" Sarah's smile faltered, just for a second, thrown by the lack of expected drama. She recovered quickly, letting out a small, amused laugh. "What do we want? Mark has a few things to get. He's realized he made a terrible mistake." She paused, letting the words hang, before delivering the final twist of the knife. "Staying with you for so long. He's moving in with me. Tonight." Amelia's gaze was fixed, not on the triumphant woman in the designer dress, but on the pale, hollowed-out man standing behind her. "He's moving in with me. Tonight." The words echoed, but the sting was already fading, replaced by a cold, analytical numbness. She was looking at her husband, the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and she was waiting. She was waiting for him to deny it. To look at her just once and say, "Amelia, this is a misunderstanding. It's not true." She waited for one shred of the man she married to surface. Mark's eyes darted nervously between the floor and Sarah's back. He licked his lips, his throat working, but no words came. He gave a tiny, imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture of such profound weakness, such complete surrender, that it snapped the last thread of Amelia's grief. In that moment, the man she loved vanished. He wasn't stolen, he had simply ceased to exist. The person standing in her hallway was a stranger, a pathetic, weak-willed ghost wearing her husband's face. The realization was a physical blow, sharper than the betrayal itself. "He's moving in with you," Amelia repeated, her voice devoid of inflection. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. She stepped back from the doorway, pulling the door wide open. It was an invitation. "Then you better come in and get his things." This, finally, seemed to unnerve Sarah. The triumphant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the script she had written. There were supposed to be tears, accusations, pathetic pleas. There was supposed to be a satisfying, dramatic scene of a woman broken. Amelia, instead, was holding the door as if she were welcoming a repairman. She was calm. Sarah's eyes narrowed, searching Amelia's face for the cracks, for the pain she had come to witness. She found none. "Fine," Sarah snapped, her voice losing its smooth condescension. She strode into the apartment as if she owned it, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. "Mark, the bedroom. Get your laptop, your suits, and the expensive watch I bought you. Leave the rest of this clutter." Mark flinched at the command. He took a hesitant step inside, finally lifting his gaze to meet Amelia's. His eyes were desperate, pleading for what? Forgiveness? Understanding? For her to stop this, to fight for him? The pity she felt was scalding. "Amelia, he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Get your things, Mark," Amelia said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room, silencing him instantly. It was the voice she used with an unreliable supplier, not her husband. Final. Dismissive. He flinched as if slapped and shuffled past her, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and disappeared into their bedroom. The sound of a duffel bag being unzipped and drawers being pulled open filled the silence. Sarah, left alone in the living room with Amelia, seemed to regain her footing. She leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing her arms, a proprietary air about her. She was assessing the apartment, her gaze dismissive. "You know, he's been unhappy for a long time. This whole baking thing of yours." She gestured to the aprons, the stray bags of flour. "It's sweet, but it's not ambitious. He needs a partner who's on his level. Someone who understands power, who can challenge him." Amelia said nothing. She just watched the woman who had invaded her home. Sarah, emboldened by the silence, pushed on. "He was suffocating here. All this domesticity. It's not him. He told me how much he hated having to pretend to be interested in your little projects, how burdened he felt by you." Each word was a precisely aimed dart, designed to inflict maximum pain. And they did hurt, but not in the way Sarah intended. They didn't make Amelia feel worthless. They illuminated the depth of Mark's cowardice. He hadn't just cheated. He had poisoned their shared memories, painting her as a burden to justify his own weakness. Mark reappeared, dragging a black duffel bag and carrying his laptop case. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. He avoided her eyes, moving straight to the door. "Is that everything?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. "Yes," he muttered. "Good. Let's go." She pushed off the counter and walked to the door, triumphant once more. She paused, turning back to Amelia for her parting shot. "Don't worry about him. I can give him the life he deserves. A life you clearly couldn't afford. Good luck with your muffins." She smiled, a final, venomous display of victory. Amelia looked at Mark, who was fumbling with the doorknob, desperate to escape. Then she looked back at Sarah. A small, strange sound escaped her throat. It was a laugh. It was a dry, humorless sound, but it was a laugh. Sarah's smile vanished. "What's so funny?" "You," Amelia said, the coldness in her voice finally giving way to a dangerous, bright clarity. "You think you've won. You think you've taken him." She gestured to the pathetic man at the door. "You think you've won the prize." "I have," Sarah said, though her confidence was wavering. "You've won a man who lies," Amelia said, ticking the points off on her fingers. "A man who lets another woman send a text to humiliate his wife. A man who blames me for his unhappiness because he's too weak to admit his own failures. And you think you're taking him to some better life? I'm his boss. I know his potential." "You know his salary," Amelia cut in. "And you think that's the whole story." Mark at the door had frozen. He knew that tone. He knew what was coming. "Amelia!" he whispered, a desperate warning. "Don't. Please." "Don't what, Mark?" Amelia said, her eyes boring into his. "Don't tell her? Don't tell her that the inheritance from my grandmother finally cleared 3 days ago? The one you've been salivating over? The one you already had plans for? The one you were going to help me invest?" Sarah's head snapped toward Mark. "What? What inheritance?" "Oh, he didn't tell you?" Amelia's voice was laced with mock surprise. "Mark, you should have told your new partner. It's significant. Life-changing, you might say." She turned her gaze fully on Sarah, whose face had gone from triumphant to confused to calculating in a matter of seconds. "She's lying, Mark," Sarah snapped, her eyes narrowing. Mark couldn't speak. He just stared at Amelia, his face ashen. "Am I, Mark?" Amelia asked softly. "Am I lying? Or is the truth that every cent of it is in a trust that my grandmother set up, in my name, and my name alone? The trust you've been trying to get me to break for the last 6 months." The silence was absolute. Sarah looked at Mark, truly looked at him, and saw not a partner, but a man who had just been exposed. The man she'd won was not the ambitious alpha she'd slept with. He was a broke, deceitful man who had just been cut off from his wife's fortune. Amelia walked to the door and pulled it open wider. "Keep him," she said, her voice now calm, almost gentle. "He's all yours. But this apartment, the car, the business, and the inheritance, those are all mine. You came for his things. You have them. Please leave." The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound Amelia had ever heard. It was a sound of absolute finality, a thick metal line drawn between her past and her future. For a long, breathless moment, she remained perfectly still, her forehead resting against the cool wood of the door. The hollow, echoing silence of the apartment pressed in on her. He was gone. They were gone. The adrenaline that had sharpened her mind and steadied her voice began to drain away, leaving a vast, cold emptiness in its wake. Her knees buckled. She didn't fall, but rather slid slowly down the length of the door until she was sitting in a crumpled heap on the hardwood floor. Her body began to tremble, a deep, rattling shudder that started in her chest and radiated out to her fingertips. It wasn't a sob, not yet. There were no tears. It was the violent, physical aftershock of an explosion, the moment after the blast when the air is sucked from the world. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, half expecting to find herself physically wounded. The pain was real, a dull, heavy ache behind her ribs. He was gone. After 6 years, it had ended in less than 30 minutes. She sat there, in the harsh 3 a.m. light of the hallway, and let the reality wash over her. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way of it. The text message, the arrogance, the cruelty, the arrival at her door. And Mark, his weakness was, in its own way, a greater betrayal than the infidelity. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been a coward. He had allowed that woman to humiliate his wife, to stand in their home and sneer at her life's work. He had let Sarah wield his new salary and position as a weapon, all while he was secretly, desperately, hoping to get his hands on Amelia's money. That thought brought her head up. The inheritance. The words had come out of her in a white-hot, instinctive strike. It wasn't a calculated plan. It was the truth, and it was the only weapon she'd had. Her grandmother, a formidable woman who had built and lost 2 businesses, had seen Mark clearly from the very beginning. "He has weak hands, Amelia," she'd said, a phrase Amelia hadn't understood at the time. A man with weak hands can't hold on to a good woman or his own integrity. The trust had been her grandmother's final, protective act, a financial fortress Amelia hadn't truly appreciated until this very second. The money was real, and it was all hers. A new feeling, cold and sharp, began to cut through the shock. It was a sudden, frantic urge to purge. She couldn't breathe in this apartment, not while his ghost lingered. She pushed herself up from the floor, her legs unsteady but functional. She marched into the bathroom. His toothbrush, electric, sat in its charger next to her simple bamboo one. She grabbed it, the charger, his shaving cream, his razor, the expensive cologne Sarah had likely bought him. She swept them all into the small trash can. She moved to the bedroom. The duffel bag was gone, but the indentations of his suits still hung in the closet. She pulled out the few remaining items. His old college sweatshirt he wore on lazy Sundays, a pair of running shoes he hadn't used in a year, a stack of tech magazines on his nightstand. She shoved them all into a black plastic trash bag. Every item was a small, lingering lie. The sweatshirt he'd worn while cuddling her, all while texting her. The shoes from a life he'd pretended to want. This wasn't just cleaning, it was an exorcism. She tied the bag with a vicious pull and dragged it to the front door, placing it next to the bathroom trash. She stood in the middle of her living room, breathing heavily. The apartment was already different. It was quieter. It was hers. A grim, joyless realization settled on her. Sarah hadn't one. Sarah, in her arrogant, corporate raider blindness, had just been saddled with a parasite. She had acquired a man with no spine, no loyalty, and as she now knew, no money of his own. Amelia almost pitted her. She knew women like Sarah. The moment Mark became a liability, the moment his weakness outweighed his usefulness, Sarah would discard him with the same casual cruelty she had shown Amelia. Her eyes drifted to the kitchen, to the abandoned lump of dough on the counter, now hopelessly overproofed and ruined. Sarah's mocking voice echoed in her head. "Good luck with your muffins. This whole baking thing of yours, it's sweet." Amelia walked into the kitchen. She looked at the ruined dough, the symbol of her interrupted life. It was useless. She scooped up the entire sticky, deflated mass and dropped it into the new, empty trash bin. Without a pause, she turned to the pantry. She pulled down a fresh, 50-pound bag of flour. She hauled out the butter, the eggs, the yeast. She washed her hands, scrubbing them raw under cold water, washing away the figurative and literal grime of the last hour. It was 3:15 a.m. Her orders were due in less than 6 hours. The wedding cakes, the croissants, the tarts. She had a business to run. Mark and Sarah had taken her husband, but they would not take her dream. They would not take the artful crust. This wasn't a sweet little project. It was her empire. She measured the flour, her movements precise, economical. She cracked the eggs, the sound sharp in the quiet. She began to mix a new batch, double the original recipe. Her hands, which had been trembling, were now strong and sure. She turned the dough out onto the floured steel counter and began to knead, her entire body pouring into the work. The rhythm was a meditation. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. Each fold was a promise. Each press was a vow. She was not a victim. She was not a burden. She was a founder, and she had work to do. Amelia worked with a feverish, mechanical precision. The kitchen, once her sanctuary of creative joy, had transformed into a command center. Her grief and rage were not allowed to be paralyzing. She channeled them, pouring the white-hot energy into the physical demands of her craft. The industrial mixers was a roar in the pre-dawn quiet, a welcome noise that drowned out the looping echo of Sarah's voice and the pathetic, shuffling footsteps of her husband. She scaled ingredients with a sharp, aggressive accuracy. 2,000 grams of flour, 1,200 grams of high-fat butter, 400 grams of sugar. There was no room for error. There was no room for weakness. Her hands, which she had scrubbed raw, were now tools. She slammed the butter block with a rolling pin, the percussive thwack satisfying, a physical release for the violence she felt in her heart. She was laminating dough, the complex, repetitive process of folding and turning, that created the delicate, airy layers of a perfect croissant. It was a process that required patience and control, two things she felt had been ripped from her. Yet, here they were in her hands. As she worked, her mind, now free from the immediate shock, began to dissect the last 6 years with a surgeon's cold clarity. She wasn't mourning the man she'd just lost. She was mourning the man who had never existed. The supportive husband, the equal partner, the man who supposedly championed her dream. It had all been an illusion. He hadn't been a partner. He'd been a passenger. Worse, a saboteur, quietly resenting the very ambition he claimed to admire, all while leveraging her stability to chase his own selfish, shallow validation from a woman like Sarah. He had been unhappy. He had felt burdened. The audacity of it. After all the nights she balanced their books, cooked their meals, and managed their life so he could focus on his career. He was a man built of excuses. The clock on the oven ticked past 4 a.m., then 5 a.m. A pot of coffee, black and scalding, became her only companion. She drank it straight from the mug, not for pleasure, but for fuel, the bitterness grounding her. Her back ached, a deep, fiery protest from her shoulders down to her hips. Her eyes burned from exhaustion and the fine mist of flour in the air. But she didn't slow down. Good luck with your muffins. Sarah's parting shot, meant to belittle, had become a mantra. Fine. She would give them muffins. She would give them croissants that shattered with a whisper. She would give them lemon tarts so sharp and bright they made your mouth water. She would build an empire on sugar and butter, and she would bury them with it. The insult had misfired. It hadn't made her feel small. It had made her feel focused. It had clarified the stakes. This wasn't a hobby. This was her life. She thought about the inheritance, the look on Sarah's face, the shock, the instant, predatory recalculation. Amelia had seen that look before, on sharks who just scented blood. But this time, the blood wasn't hers. It was Mark's. Sarah had just realized her prize was defective. She hadn't stolen a high-earning, ambitious alpha. She'd been conned into taking on a bad investment, a man with a proven history of lies and an expectation of being financially carried. The thought brought a grim, hollow smile to Amelia's face. Sarah thought she was playing chess, but she just gleefully checkmated herself. Mark was her problem now. Just as she slid the final tray of lemon tarts into the convection oven, a pale, grayish-blue light began to filter through the kitchen window. Dawn. The city was waking up, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had been demolished and rebuilt in the span of 3 hours. The sky lightened from charcoal to a bruised purple, then to a hopeful, watery orange. The smells in her kitchen were no longer sour with betrayal. They were rich with caramelizing sugar, browning butter, and toasted almonds. It was the smell of victory. At 6:30 a.m. she stood back. The cooling racks were full. Every last one. Rows upon rows of perfectly laminated croissants, their amber shells glistening. Trays of lemon tarts, their yellow curd centers like captured sunshine. And on the main prep table, the 2 wedding cakes stood in pristine, multi-tiered elegance, their buttercream flawless. She had done it. She had met her deadlines. The cafe, the wedding, the private orders, all would be fulfilled. The adrenaline finally receded, and the crash was immediate. A wave of exhaustion so profound it was dizzying. Her hands, caked in dried dough and sugar, began to tremble again, the strength ebbing from them. She leaned against the steel counter, the metal cold against her hot forehead. She closed her eyes, just for a second. The sun was up. The orders were ready. She was, for the first time in 6 years, completely and utterly alone. And for the first time, she realized that might be the only way she could survive. The next step was simple: box the orders, make the deliveries. And then, she had no idea. But first, She had to make one very important phone call. The clock on the oven read 7:01 a.m. The sun was no longer a promise. It was a fact, streaming in and illuminating the fine layer of flour that coated every surface of her kitchen. Amelia stood in the center of her creation, surrounded by the tangible proof of her resilience. The aroma was intoxicating, a rich blend of butter, sugar, and toasted nuts. But to her, it was the smell of armor. She was running on a toxic cocktail of caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer, spiteful willpower. Her body screamed for sleep, a dull, aching throb behind her eyes and in her joints, but her mind was terrifyingly sharp. It was no longer a mind clouded by love or grief. It was a calculator. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over her contacts, over the entry 4 mark, but she bypassed it. She opened her web browser and typed, "Best divorce attorney, high net worth." Her friend, another small business owner who had gone through a nasty split, had mentioned a name months ago, filed away in Amelia's mind as one of those pieces of information you hope you'll never need. "Elena Vargas," she'd said. "She's not a lawyer. She's a tactical strike." Amelia found the firm's number. It was 7:03 a.m. on a weekday. She expected a recorded message, an answering service. Instead, on the second ring, a crisp professional voice answered. "Vargas, Levine and Associates. How may I direct your call?" Amelia's voice, when she spoke, was as dry and steady as the flour on her hands. "My name is Amelia Hayes. I need to make an emergency appointment with Ms. Vargas. Today. Ms. Vargas's schedule is typically booked months in advance. May I ask the nature of the consultation?" "It concerns an immediate filing for divorce on grounds of adultery," Amelia said, the words tasting like metal. "There are contested assets, a solely owned small business, and a significant, non-matrimonial inheritance trust that my husband was attempting to access." The silence on the other end was brief, but it was the silence of a predator perking its ears. "One moment, Miss Hayes." She was put on hold, but not for long. The receptionist returned. "Ms. Vargas can see you at 1:30 p.m. Her usual consultation fee will apply. Will that work?" "Yes," Amelia said. "I'll be there." She hung up. A single, decisive click. That was done. Step 1. Now step 2. She couldn't show up to a high-powered law firm smelling of yeast and buttercream. But first, the deliveries. Her clients, her contracts, her reputation, these were things she had built, and they were non-negotiable. She began to box the orders with a practiced, efficient speed. The croissants into their pink boxes, the tarts into their windowed containers. Finally, she and her one part-time assistant, who wouldn't be in for hours, had designed special, reinforced transport for the wedding cakes. She loaded them onto a tiered trolley. Loading the van was a purely physical act, a welcome, mindless burn of muscle. The sky was a bright, indifferent blue. She drove first to the downtown cafe, her biggest wholesale client. The owner, a cheerful man named Dave, met her at the door. "Amelia, you're a lifesaver and early too," he beamed, taking the heavy trays from her. He paused, looking at her face. "Whoa, kid. Rough night. You look like you went 12 rounds. Amelia forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "You should see the other guy. Just a big order. You know how it is." "Well, they look incredible as always," he said, already sliding the tarts into his display case. She nodded, accepted the payment slip, and left. One down. The drive to the wedding venue was longer, out toward the city's wealthier suburbs. It was a beautiful, sprawling estate with gardens and white tents. She wheeled the precious cargo of the 2 cakes, one a 5-tiered classic, the other a modern groom's cake, through a service entrance. The wedding planner, a famously frantic woman in a headset, rushed over, her face a mask of stress. "Oh, thank God, the cakes are here. Amelia, you're perfect." She glanced at the confections, and her professional anxiety melted into genuine awe. They're stunning. Absolutely perfect. Amelia looked at the 2 cakes, symbols of a new beginning, of hope and shared futures. A bitter, cold irony washed through her, so potent it made her stomach clench. She thought of her own wedding cake, a simple, elegant thing she had baked herself. She wondered if Mark even remembered what flavor it was. She pushed the thought down, locking it in a box and shoving it deep into the recesses of her mind. This was a job. "Where would you like the final setup?" she asked, her voice pure business. After setting them up and getting the final check signed, a very large check, she was back in her van. It was 11 a.m. She was done. She had fulfilled every single promise. She sat in the driver's seat in the sun-drenched parking lot of the wedding venue, the silence of the van suddenly oppressive. She pulled out her phone. 0 missed calls. 0 new messages. The finality of it hit her. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted an "I'm sorry," or "we need to talk," or even a pathetic "I made a mistake." He had simply been taken, and he had gone. His cowardice was, in the end, total. The last, flickering ember of hope that this was some terrible 2 a.m. mistake, that the mark she knew was still in there, was finally extinguished. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hair was matted with sweat and flour, her eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, and there was a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She looked haunted. She looked exhausted. But as she stared into her own eyes, she saw something else, something she hadn't seen before. It was the hard, unyielding glint of her grandmother's resolve. "Okay," she whispered to the woman in the mirror. "Now we go to war." She turned the key in the ignition. She had 2.5 hours to get home, shower, change, and become the kind of woman who hires Elena Vargas. The apartment was exactly as she had left it, but it felt entirely different. The morning sun, now high and bright, streamed into the living room, illuminating not a home but a stage. The black trash bags, filled with Mark's remaining possessions, sat by the door like a somber, final punctuation mark. Amelia didn't hesitate. She picked up both the bathroom trash can and the heavy garbage bag, walked them down the hall to the building's refuse chute, and dropped them in. The sound of them tumbling into the darkness was deeply, grimly satisfying. She had, quite literally, thrown her husband in the trash. She walked back inside and locked the door. 11:15 a.m. She had just over 2 hours. She moved directly to the bathroom and turned on the shower, cranking the handle until the water was scalding hot. She stripped off the clothes she'd been in for nearly 24 hours, the flour-dusted tank top and sweats, and stepped into the steam. The water was a shock, a painful, cleansing fire. She stood under the spray for a long time, her head bowed, letting the heat soak into her aching, exhausted muscles. She scrubbed her skin, not just to remove the grime and flour, but to erase a memory. She felt as though she were trying to scrub off his touch, his scent, the 6 years of naive intimacy. This was where the tears finally came. Not the hysterical sobs Sarah had expected, but a silent, violent storm of grief that racked her entire body. It was a raw, agonizing acknowledgement of the sheer, stupid waste of it all. The waste of her love, her time, her trust. She wept for the woman she had been, the one who had believed in the man who was now a ghost. The sobs came from a place so deep she didn't recognize the sound. She allowed it. She gave herself 5 minutes to be completely, utterly broken. When the 5 minutes were up, she twisted the handle to full cold. The icy water was a brutal, electric shock. It snapped her spine straight. Her breath hitched, the grief was flash-frozen, and the broken woman was gone. She turned off the water. The storm was over. She toweled off with a ruthless efficiency. In the bedroom, she walked to the closet, pushing past the empty hangers where his suits had been. She bypassed her own comfortable, wife clothes, the soft sweaters, the jeans. She reached for the outfit she'd bought when she applied for her first small business loan. It was a perfectly tailored, navy blue pantsuit. It was not the outfit of a baker. It was the outfit of a CEO. She pulled her damp hair back into a severe, tight bun at the nape of her neck. Her makeup was minimal but deliberate. Concealer to hide the exhaustion, a sharp line of eyeliner, and a dark, neutral lipstick. She looked in the mirror. The red-rimmed, haunted woman was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone cold and sharp and dangerous. She looked, Amelia thought, a lot like her grandmother. 12:30 p.m. She went to her small desk in the corner. She didn't just grab her purse. She took her business attaché case. Into it, she methodically placed a folder. Inside, the incorporation papers for the Artful Crust LLC, clearly stating she was the sole founder and 100% owner. She added the last 3 bank statements for the business, and her personal bank statements. And finally, she slipped in the thick, vellum-paper document from her grandmother's estate lawyer, the fully executed, ironclad trust. She took her phone, took a screenshot of the 2:02 a.m. text message, and emailed it to herself. Evidence. She was in the lobby of Vargas, Levine, and Associates at 1:20 p.m. The office was a temple of wealth and power, all glass, polished marble, and silent, expensive-looking art. It was designed to intimidate, to make opponents feel small before they'd even sat down. Amelia felt a profound sense of calm. She was in the right place. At 1:30 p.m. on the dot, a paralegal led her to a corner office with a breathtaking 40th floor view of the city. A woman stood to greet her, framed against the skyline. She was not tall, but she radiated an energy that made her seem towering. This was Elena Vargas. She was dressed in a sharp, gray suit, her black hair cut in a severe, geometric bob. Her eyes were dark and piercing. She did not smile. She did not offer sympathy. "Miss Hayes." Elena Vargas. Her handshake was firm, brief, and dry. "My assistant said it was an emergency. My afternoon is tight, so let's get to it." She gestured to a leather chair. "Don't start with how you feel. I can see how you feel. Start with what happened, what you have, and what you want." The bluntness was a relief, like a splash of cold water. Amelia sat, placed her attaché case on her lap, and clicked it open. She didn't cry. Her voice was as cold and steady as the glass and steel view. "At 2:02 a.m. this morning, I received a text message from my husband's phone, sent by his boss, Sarah Mitchell, informing me he was now hers. At 2:22 a.m., they arrived at my apartment to collect his things." She pulled out the printed email of the screenshot and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. Elena Vargas picked up the paper, her eyes scanning it. A flicker of something, not surprise but tactical interest, passed over her face. "He's an executive at a consulting firm," Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength. "She is his direct superior. He has no assets of his own. We have a shared checking account, which is minimal. I, however, am the sole owner of a profitable, debt-free LLC." She slid the incorporation papers across. "And 3 days ago, I came into a significant, 7-figure inheritance, which is secured in a non-matrimonial trust that my husband has been trying to get me to break for 6 months." She slid the trust document onto the desk. Elena Vargas looked from the text message to the trust document. She looked up at Amelia, and for the first time, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a shark that had just been handed a filet mignon. "Ms. Hayes," the lawyer said, leaning forward, "this isn't an emergency. This is a gift. Now, tell me exactly what you want." Amelia looked at the woman across the desk, this general who was offering her an army. The question, "What do you want?" hung in the air, simple and profound. For 6 years, her wants had been plural. "We want a successful business. We want a home. We want a future." The "we" was now a "me," and the "me" was a stranger she was just getting to know. She found her voice, and it was as crisp as the legal documents in front of her. "I want him gone," Amelia stated, her voice resonating with a finality that surprised even her. "I don't want a long, messy fight. I want a clean cut. I want to protect my business. It is mine. I built it, and he will not touch it. I want to protect my inheritance. It is my family's, and he will not touch it. The apartment is in my name. He will not enter it again. I don't want a penny of his money. He will not get a penny of mine. I want him erased from my life, and I want it done fast." Elena Vargas listened without blinking, her hands steepled on the desk. She absorbed the information, her mind clearly processing variables at a speed Amelia could only admire. The lawyer's small, cold smile returned. "Good," Elena said. "What you want is not just possible, it's inevitable. You are not in a strong position, Miss Hayes. You are in an unassailable one. You are, for all intents and purposes, bulletproof. Your husband, on the other hand, has just handed you a loaded gun, and his boss has provided the ammunition." She tapped the printout of the text message. "This is our gift. This is not just proof of adultery. This is a text from his direct superior on his own device, sent to his wife in the middle of the night. This is harassment. This is a hostile environment. This is a staggering violation of corporate policy, not to mention ethics. Sarah Mitchell didn't just expose an affair, she exposed her company to a massive lawsuit. And that is our leverage. We're not just divorcing Mark. We are cornering Sarah. Amelia felt a chill. This was so much bigger than she had realized. She had been focused on the personal betrayal. Elena was focused on the corporate fallout. Here is what we're going to do, Elena continued, leaning forward. She was no longer a lawyer, she was a strategist laying out a battle plan. First, as of this minute, you will move all funds from any shared accounts into a new, personal account. You said the shared account is minimal? Good. Empty it. It's matrimonial property, and you're securing it. Second, my office will file for divorce this afternoon, citing adultery. We will simultaneously file for an exclusive possession order for the apartment, which, since it's in your name, will be granted immediately. She held up a hand. But we will not serve those papers to Mark. Not yet. That's not the smart move. What's the smart move? Amelia asked. The smart move, Elena said, her eyes glittering, is that we don't contact Mark at all. We contact his employer. My office will draft 2 letters. The first will be a settlement offer, sent directly to Mark via courier. It will be simple. He signs a full and final waiver to any and all claims on your business, your inheritance, the apartment, and any spousal support. In return, you waive any claim on his 401k and pension. He walks away with his clothes and his duffel bag. That's it. He will be strongly advised to take the deal. And the second letter? Elena's smile widened. The second letter is the hammer. It will be addressed to the chief legal officer and the head of human resources at his firm. It will be a notification of pending litigation. It will calmly and professionally detail how a senior executive, Miss Sarah Mitchell, has engaged in a pattern of harassment against the spouse of a subordinate, creating a hostile environment and using company resources, implied of course, to pursue an inappropriate relationship. We will include a copy of the text message. We will state that you are exploring all legal options, both against Ms. Mitchell personally and against the firm for enabling her behavior. Amelia's breath caught. She saw it now. It was a pincer movement. You see, Elena explained, Mark has no money and no power. Sarah has both. But her power exists only within that company. The company will not risk a multi-million-dollar harassment suit, the bad press, and the SEC violation of a boss having an affair with a subordinate, all for one executive. They will cut their losses. They will force her to fix it. And fixing it means getting Mark to sign our settlement immediately to make this all go away. Sarah's career will be on the line. She will have a choice, her lover or her job. Given what you've told me, she will choose her job. It was brutal. It was total. It was, Amelia realized, exactly what she wanted. He'll sign, Amelia said, the certainty settling into her bones. He's weak, and she won't sacrifice her career for him. She just wanted him as a trophy. Exactly. She thought she was winning a prize. She's about to find out she acquired a catastrophic liability, Elena said. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. My office will have the account motion and the letters drafted by 5 o'clock. You will go to your bank, move the money, and then you will go home. You will change your locks. You will not answer his calls or his texts. You will forward everything to me. You are no longer his wife. You are my client. Do you understand? Amelia stood, her exhaustion a heavy cloak, but her spine a rod of steel. The broken woman who had wept in the shower was gone. The CEO who had walked into the office was also gone. She was something new. Yes, Amelia said, shaking the lawyer's hand. I understand completely. She walked out of the silent, marble lobby into the harsh afternoon light. The city was bustling, people rushing to their next meeting, their next coffee. They were all living in the before. Amelia was living in the after. She had a list. Go to the bank. Call a locksmith. Go home. Wait. The war had begun, and she hadn't had to fire a single shot. She had just hired a sniper. The afternoon light was harsh and unforgiving as Amelia walked out of the towering glass building. The city, which had felt like a hostile, indifferent entity just that morning, now seemed small, manageable. She was no longer a victim adrift in it. She was a woman with a plan, a fortress at her back. Elena Vargas had not just given her legal advice, she had given her a spine of high-tensile steel. Amelia had a list, and she executed it with the same non-negotiable precision she used for her most complex pastry orders. First, the bank. She walked into the cool, quiet marble-floored branch of her local bank, the one she'd used for both her personal and business accounts. She sat at a polished wood desk opposite a polite, slightly bored-looking personal banker. She explained, in a voice that was calm and flat, that she was initiating divorce proceedings and needed to secure her funds. The banker's practiced neutrality didn't flicker, but he became much more attentive. Amelia transferred every cent from the joint checking account, a paltry sum of just over $2,000, into her sole proprietor business account, which Mark had no access to. She then instructed the banker to open an entirely new personal checking account, linked to nothing, and funded it with a transfer from her business. Finally, she had her name and only her name put on the new account. The entire process was sterile, procedural, and quiet. With a few keystrokes, she financially amputated him. The banker handed her a new, temporary debit card. She tucked it into her wallet, a thin piece of plastic that was a declaration of independence. Next, the locksmith. She called an emergency 24/7 service from the bank's lobby. A van was at her building in less than 30 minutes. She stood in the hallway, the same hallway where she had last seen Mark's pale, defeated face, and watched as a burly man with a large drill dismantled the lock that Mark still had a key for. The metallic shriek of the drill was a cleansing sound, an exorcism in progress. He installed a new, high-security deadbolt, a complex-looking mechanism of steel. He handed her 3 new, shiny keys. "All set, ma'am," he said, handing her the invoice. "Nobody's getting through that without a battering ram." "Thank you," she said, signing the bill. "That's exactly what I wanted." She closed the door. The sound of the new deadbolt sliding into place was a deep, resonant thud. It was the sound of a vault door closing. She was home. She was safe. And then the adrenaline left. It didn't fade. It vanished, as if a plug had been pulled. A wave of exhaustion so profound, so heavy, it was almost gravitational, pulled her to her knees. She didn't fall, but she sank down onto her own sofa, the navy blue suit jacket still on. The apartment was silent. It was not the 2 a.m. silence, which had been filled with dread and betrayal. It was a 4 p.m. silence, absolute and empty. The sun, slanting low through the windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. She was alone. She was truly, irrevocably alone. Her body, which had been running on caffeine and rage for 26 hours, began to shut down. Her limbs felt like lead. Her eyes burned, a gritty, sandpaper-like pain from lack of sleep. A deep, bone-rattling ache had settled in her back from the hours of baking. She had won the battle. She had set the terms of the war, but the cost was her entire life. Her phone, sitting on the coffee table, buzzed. It was a terrifying, violent sound in the stillness. She flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. She looked at the screen. The name Mark flashed. It was a text. "Amelia, what is this?" "My office just got a letter from a lawyer." "Call me right now." "This is insane." Her fingers twitched toward the phone, the old, ingrained habit of responding to him, of managing his emotions, surging up. Another buzz. A new text from him. "This isn't funny. You're trying to ruin me? After everything I did for you?" Another buzz. A missed call. He was panicking. The impulse to answer, to scream at him, to defend herself, was a physical thing, a hook in her gut. "Don't answer. You are my client." Elena's voice was a cold, clear command in her head. Her hands were shaking, but she did not reply. Instead, she took a screenshot of the texts. She forwarded them, along with the missed call log, to the email address Elena had given her. She typed a single word in the subject line, contact. Then, she turned her phone over, face down on the table. She sat there in the quiet as the sun began to set, painting her living room in shades of orange and purple. The trap was sprung. The animal was rattling the cage. She could picture the scene. Sarah, her face ashen, reading the letter from HR, Mark, pale and terrified, realizing the game was over. They were trapped. They were turning on each other. The thought brought her no joy, no satisfaction. It was just done. She was so tired. She realized she hadn't eaten anything since a piece of toast the previous morning. She went into her kitchen. She looked at the single, leftover lemon tart on the counter, a perfect, beautiful thing. She couldn't eat it. It was for a different life. Instead, she opened her refrigerator, took out a carton of eggs, and made herself a simple omelet. She ate it standing at the counter, chewing methodically, forcing her body to accept the fuel. She drank a large glass of water. Then she walked into her bedroom, shedding the suit, her armor, piece by piece. She put on an old t-shirt and climbed into the middle of the bed. It felt vast, empty. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She only knew that she had survived today. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she fell asleep, not as a wife, but as a survivor. Amelia awoke to the sound of her own breathing. The sleep had been a dark, dreamless abyss, a complete system shut down. She lay still for a long moment, adrift in the unfamiliar landscape of her own bed. The sheets on the other side were cold. The apartment was silent, but it was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of the night before. It was just quiet. The morning sun was streaming through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the room. It was 9 a.m. She had slept for nearly 16 hours. Her body ached, a deep, cellular exhaustion. But the frantic, buzzing panic in her chest was gone. In its place was a vast, cold calm. She sat up. Her navy blue suit was crumpled on the floor where she'd left it, a discarded snakeskin. She looked at her phone on the nightstand. The screen was dark. She felt a sudden, cold lurch. Had she dreamed it all? Was it all a 2 a.m. flower-induced nightmare? She picked it up. The screen lit up, and she saw it. A barrage of notifications. 23 missed calls from Mark. 15 text messages from Mark. 2 missed calls from an unknown number. She didn't read the texts. She didn't need to. The sheer volume was not the sound of an apology. It was the sound of a man drowning. He had gone from panic to angry to, she assumed, pleading. She felt a flicker of nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even satisfaction. It was the emotional equivalent of looking at a bill that had already been paid. She got up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. The familiar, gurgling sound was a comfort, a small piece of the before that still fit into the after. As the rich, dark aroma began to fill the kitchen, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was not Mark. It was the main line for Vargas, Levine and Associates. Her hand was perfectly steady. She pressed accept. Amelia! Good morning, Miss Hayes. Elena Vargas's voice was as crisp as a fresh-pressed dollar bill. I trust you're having a productive morning. It's quiet, Miss Vargas, Amelia replied, her voice still rough from sleep. As it should be, the lawyer said. There was a brief pause, the sound of papers being shuffled. Well, the blitzkrieg was successful. I received a call at 7:45 a.m. from the general counsel of your husband's, forgive me, ex-husband's firm. He was, as I predicted, highly motivated to make this entire situation disappear before his stock market-sensitive ears had to hear about it again. Amelia leaned against the counter, the coffee pot in her hand. Mark was called into their headquarters at 8:30 a.m. Elena continued, her voice flat, as if reporting inventory. He was not accompanied by Sarah Mitchell. He was accompanied by 2 very nervous corporate attorneys. They presented him with our settlement agreement. He was reluctant. So, they presented him with his alternative. Which was? Amelia asked. Termination for cause, citing gross misconduct and violations of the company's ethics and harassment policies. And, of course, a lifetime of litigation from us. He signed. Amelia closed her eyes. The signature. The final, legal severing. He signed the full and final waiver, Miss Hayes. He has no claim on your business. No claim on the trust. No claim on this apartment. No claim to spousal support. He will keep his 401k and his personal effects. The divorce will be finalized as an uncontested filing in the shortest possible time the state allows. He is legally a ghost. A single, hot tear escaped Amelia's eye and rolled down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The tension she had been holding in her shoulders, her back, her jaw for the last 32 hours, it just evaporated. "What about him?" she asked, her voice quiet. "His job." "Terminated," Elena said, the word a steel trap closing. "Effective immediately. They couldn't have him in the building. He's a walking, talking lawsuit, and his relationship with Mitchell made him a massive liability. And Sarah!" This time, Amelia heard the faintest trace of amusement in the lawyer's voice. "Ms. Mitchell has been placed on an immediate, indefinite personal leave of absence to focus on her family. Her career at that firm is over. They will buy out her contract, and she will be gone by the end of the year. In her attempt to publicly humiliate you, she cost herself her job, her reputation, and her lover. A rather spectacular self-immolation. He's mine now." The text echoed in Amelia's head, but this time it was a joke. Sarah had won. She had won a weak, unemployed, faithless man with no money and no future. They deserved each other. They were each other's punishment. "Thank you, Elena," Amelia said, the words heavy with a gratitude she couldn't fully express. "You're a very wealthy woman, Miss Hayes," Elena said. "Go live your life. My office will send you the final bill." The line clicked. Amelia stood in her sun-drenched kitchen, a cup of black coffee in her hand. She was alone. She was free. The future, which had been a terrifying, dark void just yesterday, now looked open. It was a blank page. She took a sip of her coffee. It was strong, slightly bitter, and it was all hers. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a calendar alert. It was a reminder she had set 2 weeks ago in her old life. 11 a.m., meeting with commercial realtor 14th Street storefront. She had been planning to expand, the artful crust. She wanted a real bakery, a storefront, a place where she could have employees and a proper test kitchen. Mark had been hesitant. "It's a big risk, Amelia," he'd said, frowning. "The overhead. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of pressure?" He had been an anchor, she realized, disguised as a concern. She looked at the reminder. She thought of her inheritance. She thought of her business, now safe. She thought of Sarah's sneering, dismissive voice. "Good luck with your muffins." A slow, genuine smile spread across Amelia's face. It was the first one in what felt like a lifetime. She looked around her apartment kitchen, the place where she had built her dream, and where her life had almost ended. It was a good start, but it was far too small. She picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and tapped the name of the realtor. "Hi, David," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Amelia Hayes. Yes, I'm still on for 11 a.m. In fact, I'd like to add 2 more properties to our tour. The ones in the new development. Yes, my budget has just increased. Significantly.